Namaskar, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Banashri Banerjee, and it is my privilege to welcome panelists and participants to this webinar on behalf of INHAF. This, as you know, is the 43rd in this webinar series. Some of you may have participated in the previous webinars, but many have joined for the first time. So before we proceed, I will take a few minutes to introduce INHAF and the series. INHAF, or Habitat Forum, is a national level membership organization, and the members are professionals, academics, uh, activists, and civil society organizations. And as the name implies, INHAF works in the field of human settlements and as a forum that brings together diverse groups such as government, civil society organizations, communities, education and research institutions, and businesses. Now, the idea is to collectively work towards alternatives and innovations to overcome systemic constraints and utilize opportunities towards building inclusive, productive, and sustainable urban and rural habitats. In its last 3 decades of existence, INHAF has taken several steps in this direction. This webinar series, themed as Rethinking Cities, is very much part of INHAF's efforts in collective thinking and sharing experiences and ideas. So from June last year to now, more than 200 people have discussed and shared perspectives on a number of issues. And many times more have joined in as participants to enrich the process with questions, comments, and much food for thought. So in a sense, it has become a sort of a melting pot in which a lot of people have expressed their views. This includes experts, migrant workers, trade union leaders, specialists, planners, economists, slum dwellers, development thinkers, young activists, young professionals, and so on. So what is the logic behind the webinar series? To answer this question, I will quote Kirti Shah, who is very much among us, who first thought of a series of 30 webinars. The logic behind 30 or more, said Kirti, is to adequately handle the complexity of the subject, rethinking cities. One or two would have left much unsaid, unaddressed, and many questions unasked. So here we are on the 43rd of this series of webinars. And such an ambitious initiative could not have been implemented by INHAF alone. The series is a joint effort of INHAF and a number of urban professionals and organizations. Studio INHAF, which is represented by Radhika, has been set up to coordinate the series, while each webinar is anchored by any of the partners. Like this one and the next are by Cities Alliance and GIZ. The focus is largely on Indian cities, but that does not mean that the webinars are restricted to Indian speakers, Indian participants, and Indian cities alone. The events have a mix of people and experiences from India and elsewhere, and many, like this one, have been anchored by international organizations. This enriches the process of reflection and learning. And we can say that these webinars are a part of a much needed societal dialogue on how we handle urbanization processes and develop cities so that they remain engines of economic growth, but minus their exploitative instincts, elements, and systems. Actually, many initiatives and policies already exist. Perhaps we need to connect the disconnected, and that is where societal dialogue can be of much help. And this need for dialogue is not new, but as we know, the pandemic has intensified the inconsistencies, divides, and fragility of social, economic, and governance processes and set in an urgency which was perhaps not there before. And on a positive note, like Aparna said a few minutes ago, the pandemic has forced us to go digital and has actually inadvertently expanded our reach, though virtually, to enable exciting exchanges and reflections that has actually bridged distances. But holding webinars, of course, is not an end in itself. So I would just like to inform you that this webinar series is an integral part of an initiative INHAF launched in 2019, which is called CityURI, or Citizens Urban Initiative. Now, CityURI is about a multi-level and multidisciplinary societal effort, which is spearheaded by some of India's leading urban professionals, development thinkers, and practitioners. The aim is to work on the country's response to complex developmental challenges in a way that ensures productive, inclusive, sustainable, livable cities, towns, and villages. The webinars will provide directions and takeaways to move along this path in collaboration with many who've joined us and who continue to share their thoughts. We are at the moment in the process of consolidating the knowledge gained to be able to reach out to potential partners in this effort. Now, coming to today's session, it is the first day of the two-day webinar on the determining role of land policies and instruments in relation to urban poverty in contemporary cities. The two planned sessions will revolve around the issues of land accessibility for the poor, right to urban commons, urban development strategies, and their impact on poverty in India and countries across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So with this brief introduction, I urge you to visit the website of INHAF for announcements and links to webinars and other initiatives. And now I hand over to Aparna Das from GIZ to take forward today's proceedings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Banashri. It's a privilege for us, both I can also say on behalf of Cities Alliance and also from GIZ, to be associated with enough and at least set these dialogues, because this is just not a webinar, because I think there is much more than that, where it's an opportunity for us to discuss, talk amongst ourselves, and also there's a bring the different voices and different opinions on the table. um, I was being told by Pablo that this has been, or Radhika, that this has been a particularly a difficult exercise than the previous exercises. And I am not surprised, because the moment there is land, I think the contestations and the negotiations becomes harder. Even to make a webinar on land, and the kind of emails that has been forwarded to me, I was just finding that land seems to be a very, very sensitive, touchy issue. The moment you put land somewhere, it becomes so contentious and it becomes so emotional. With this note, I just want to lay the agenda for the entire 2 hours now. We would have opening presentations by Georg and William Cobbett. Georg Hansen from GIZ would present, and followed by William Cobbett. And then we would have four presentations in a row. I would introduce them when we get there. And after that presentation, we would have a moderated but a free flowing discussion, just to you know only on two specific topics that we would discuss. So we have precisely 2 hours. It may spill a bit, So I'm just giving a heads up from the very beginning that it may spill a bit by 10-15 minutes. Please bear with us. Um, and we will have the discussion after the presentation. So with this, I would like to invite Jörg Hansen for making his presentation. So Jörg Hansen,
Great. Yes.
Jörg Hansen, Jörg, I have to introduce a bit.
Okay.
Give me 2 minutes just to let you introduce.
Sure.
So Jörg is the project manager of the GIZ-supported urban project, Sustainable Urban Development in Smart Cities. Previously, he was heading the land use planning and management project. Jörg's professional experience is shaped by the practical works as a city and land use planner and architect in life projects worldwide. He has worked as a German state official, head of the Department for Planning and Construction of the city of Haid in northern Germany. He has also worked on several theoretical and scientific projects as a research assistant and teacher at the University of Brunswick at the Institute for Urban and Land Use Planning, and as a lecturer and program manager for the Interior Design Department of Raffles Design International University, Mumbai, India. This is a very short kind of a bio note of his, but I am working with him for last 3-4 years, and I think this entire idea of you know master planning or any planning and aggregation, how does one do it, is something that is I would like to say that maybe that is one thing that should become a part of our curriculum also. So with this introduction, Jörg, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Aparna. I hope I'm audible. If you could give me a quick feedback.
Yes, you are.
Perfect. And my slide is visible, I believe. So a very warm welcome from Delhi. It's a pleasant evening behind me. The sun has just setting over a nice urban setting. And I'm really happy to see so many faces from all around the world. I will give you a quick overview of how GIZ India has supported the idea of a spatial planning to gain spatial order in India. And I will try to link this as far as possible to the topic of the urban poor and how spatial planning can sort of contribute in solving this issue. So Aparna has already said it. I have been working in India now under the Indo-German cooperation for about 5 years. And it started all with the project Land Use Planning and Management, where we have made an attempt to sort of reintroduce the idea of a region and the necessity of a regional planning in India. It's all there. And in 2 states, sort of, we have revoked this idea, in Odisha and Tamil Nadu. And basically, it starts with this number, with the urban population that you see here in black, and the aspect ratio of 30% urban and 70% rural. At least that's what the last census from 2011 is saying. And definitely this has been changed in the last years heavily. What do these numbers show us? First of all, the need for land in urban areas that obviously grow. And the challenge to make this an inclusive growth. So the idea of cities for everyone, of leave no one behind. This is, of course, directly linked to the access of land that these 2 numbers are showing us. People that come to the cities need land or housing in order to be part of the society, in order to be able to perform in the city and to live their lives properly. So the next image is this one that shows the urban sprawl. And basically all what you see here in red, this is Hyderabad, in red is the growth of the last 10 years, so between 2001 and 2011. These areas, mostly in the so-called peri-urban areas, are in general not planned, meaning the infrastructure has not been planned and has not been set up properly in a proper way. So what we see here is unserviced land. Land, residential areas that have no proper roads, no sewage, no water, no electricity, and so on. So you get the point. This is linked directly to the quality of life for everyone. The planned city with planned infrastructure ensures all this access to this basic stuff. And the red areas in this image mean not to have all this. So the need for planning. For hundreds of years, mankind have made plans, for example, in this scale, to get an idea of where my states, where my countries are in an ancient map, or here, then in a different scale, this is Germany, Brunswick, in the urban scale. Planning in order to have an idea how to shape the future. And especially this scale, and of course, this was easy because it was within the walls of a city. This plan already gave an idea of how the city is growing and how to build the infrastructure. So if this is not happening in a participatory process, we have an issue. Let me just take a look one more at what's going on in the cities at the moment in India. So today we have the urban local bodies where usually city planning is happening and the districts around. And most of the urban development, like we have seen in the sprawl, is happening outside of this, in a vacuum of regulations, of laws. And what happens is sort of a patchy development, which is, also very hard and very expensive to set up infrastructures in these areas that are not planned. So in this project, Land Use Planning and Management, we really try to promote the idea of an integrated spatial land use planning, the idea of a compact city. And of course, this all was linked very much to participation. And let me very briefly give you two examples of participation. We have structured the idea of participation a little. We were talking about internal participation within an administration, where the departments and the ministries communicate with each other, and the external citizen interaction, the normal participation with the citizens. Plus, then on the upper side of the page, you see that we have these two areas of low tech, low complexity, mostly in a rural area participation, and a high tech, high complex urban participation. I give you some examples for both. So the first one example is how we have set up and supported the regional plan in Odisha. This was in the village of Hinchlikat, near Beherampur, where we went really in the villages, and we were just using the road chalk to sort of give an idea of the village and asking the important stakeholders, the people on the ground, how they see their village in the future. So here you see some of the outcomes. And from this, then the bigger regional plan was coined. This is an example from Tamil Nadu, Coimbatore, and this is the example from Odisha. So that was the land use planning project, and this we carried forward to the now ongoing project, the Smart City Sustainable Urban Development Project, that also GIZ is supporting. We support, of course, the Smart City mission with 100 cities, but we are not directly linked to it. So we are not limited to the area-based development approach. We also look at the whole city, at master plans, and also to the idea of a regional planning. Our main partners are now 3 states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Odisha, with the 3 smart cities of Bhubaneswar, Coimbatore, and Kochi. This project has 3 main topics, which is housing and planning, SDGs and governance, and basic service. And under housing and planning, of course, we talk a lot about the topics that we are discussing today. So we support spatial planning using digital platforms. And the second big column is that we support enabling safe, adequate, and affordable housing. So for example, the model ranking housing framework, or we assess urban planning. We talk about beneficiary-led construction and the implementation under PMAY. We explore the linkages of public spaces with the statutory planning. And of course, also this topic of land housing finance are the main pillars of this. So one example, again, for participation was an initiative in Kochi that we did along with the municipality of Kochi that's still going on. It's called My Kochi. This is sort of a visionary process where, along with the people on the ground, we try to envision the future of the city, how the people envision this, along with experts. So again, finding a consensus among the population about where we want to go jointly is super important in order to react to the needs of the people on the ground. You could see here that, for example, the whole city, the islands, was visualized in a model that you could actually walk through. And it was designed in a way that everyone could participate, young, old, even children, like you see on this image. It was very inviting. So it was not some hidden room that you can only enter via a back door. No, it was really all across the media, all across the town, inviting the people to participate in this. And in the end, this was also then handed over to an urban design competition where a lot of companies from India, planners, participated. Here you see the first 3 winners with amazing outcomes that are at the moment detailed. With this, I'm at the end, and I hand over back to you, Aparna. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Georg. I think you have set the context, and now I would invite William Corbett, popularly known as Billy. So I think in India, many would not know your full name unless they start reading your papers. Everybody refers to you as Billy. So he is I have the privilege of introducing him now. So Billy is a director of the Cities Alliance, a global partnership promoting the role of cities in sustainable development. Under his leadership, the Cities Alliance is internationally recognized for the diversity of its membership and its role for sharpening policies and marker focus on urban poverty and informality, and that also include secondary cities. Prior to joining the Cities Alliance, Billy was acting chief of the shelter branch at UN Habitat in Nairobi. He designed and launched the global campaign for secure tenure. In the government of national unity under the President Nelson Mandela, Corbett was appointed as the Director General of the National Department of Housing. It's very interesting because for us, I started following what Bonashri was teaching us, or she was the one who was writing about it. And I read the literature that has been produced by Cities Alliance and also this entire global campaign on secure tenure. And I find that it's very interesting that, how the discourse started and how it has gone and how these questions are still unresolved. And we would be discussing some of these topics in the panel discussion today. So over to you, Billy, for your presentation.
Thanks very much, Aparna. Thanks to our colleagues in INHAF and GIZ for co-organizing. The background to our involvement in this was a provocative question from my good friend Kurti to myself and Anna Claudia, which is, how come we've been doing slum upgrading for 30 years and we've made so little progress in India and elsewhere? And that's what engaged my mind in preparing for this presentation. So I don't use slides, so you actually just have to listen to me. Let me tell you my main assumption, which is that slum upgrading doesn't not happen because it's technically difficult. That's not the problem. The problem why slum upgrading doesn't happen at the scale that we need it to is that it is either politically difficult or actually it's not wanted, or both. And a lot of times this focuses around the issue of access to land. And we need to really understand land in the way that it is in cities, is it reflects history rather than the future. So it's past settlement patterns, it's past political power that you have to unravel, and that's what makes it so difficult. And of course, planning itself can be very successful in including, it can also be extremely successful in excluding. And too many plans, and you'll remember that I grew up in apartheid South Africa, planning was a great expertise there at excluding the majority of people from the cities. So I'm going to argue that we, the urban gang, the proponents of slum upgrading, we have, whether we wanted to or not, we've allowed the slum upgrading process to become compartmentalized. In fact, it's been isolated on either the physical or also the political periphery in most cities. And the result that we see is very often in India and elsewhere, small scale, off budget or donor financed, worthy projects. And I remember my good friend Enrique Ortiz, who used to be the Secretary General of HIC, when we were talking about best practices, he described these as heroics in the face of bad policy. And I think so many of our slum upgrading projects can be described like this. From my perspective, to be successful, slum upgrading needs to be understood as the physical step to the political and economic integration of the poor into the city. And if it's not understood like that, it will continue to be projectized. And that is why we see so much of slum upgrading is taking place late after the event. And so it is retrofitting back into parts of the city rather than forming a new city. The real challenge in slum upgrading, and this is what puts land at the center, is of course the issue of adequate scale. Most of the slum upgrading that we see is not of a scale that is sufficient to bring an end to the need for slum upgrading in sight. And so the problem generally continues to get bigger. And scale is only possible with at least either the leadership or the resources and the authority of local and regional and national government. You will never get to scale with excellent NGOs doing fantastic work. Ideally, and I saw this last week in a wonderful presentation of the Mukuru Special Planning Area upgrading in Nairobi, we have on the one side a decision by the county government to finally, after decades of inaction, to take really big steps for putting in bulk infrastructure, the roads, the drainage, the water, the energy, for the entire community, 400,000 people. This is a scale that cannot be achieved by small scale non-governmental organizations. But the reason why it's going to be potentially very successful is their partner in this is in fact an organization of the urban poor that has been building up its own capacity over more than a decade and closer to 2 decades. Because the state has got the possibility to go at scale, but very often state-driven solutions tend to be top-down, technocratic, and pay very little attention to long-term sustainability. And how was the land issue resolved? This was the most difficult issue in Nairobi, as it is in most cities. They invoked special legislation. They invoked a legislation that allows them to overturn the standard land provisions to actually seize control of the land and put it to a wider use that transcends the political and individual interests of the leaseholders who were given the land by a previous government 30 years ago. And that's the kind of bold step that is absolutely essential to make sure that the land that comes in forms part of a wider city and is not just the leftovers from what existing political interests don't want. So to be clear, the compartmentalization problem needs to be challenged. We need to put forward slum upgrading at an appropriate scale that it has an impact on the entire city. And therefore, it needs to be understood that when slum upgrading is at this appropriate scale and is leading to a change, to a rethinking of the city, which is what Curtis said for the overall series, it must lead to a change in the status of slum dwellers away from that language and that profile to those of citizens and of neighbors. It's a fundamental change which recognizes their right to the city, which is really what the central battle is. The second change, which is unavoidable if the slum upgrading is real, is that this must change the priorities of the local government, which has to deal with the backlog and the inequality that the decades of neglect have given rise to. The third, and this is in many ways, don't look at the mayor's speech when you're trying to measure commitment. Have a look at the budget. And slum upgrading at this scale must change priorities in the budget and the allocation of public resources away from where they've been historically to where they actually need to be on an objective basis. And this will eventually lead to changes in the cost of services, and finally, the introduction of transparent subsidies within cities, because normally the subsidization goes from the poor areas to the rich and not the other way around, whether it's through the cost of services or cheap labor providing services to the middle class and the elite in that city. These are basically hidden subsidies that make the city unequal and in the long term unsustainable. And the success of this is in the demystification of the slum dwellers and slums. I mean, quite simply, what I'm describing here as a city-wide process which impacts on all of its citizens is actually how cities prosper and evolve. And you know, when we always talk about the participation and the need to be inclusive, we're always making it correctly from the perspective of the urban poor. But let me just provoke you by saying, actually, the participation in this debate, the missing players in this debate are the middle classes and the political elite in the cities. They need to be brought into the discussion about slum upgrading because it's also their city and they need to understand their common linkages. Then we can get close to rethinking our cities. I thank you.
Thank you, Billy. I think thank you, Billy. This is really to the point, and this has been a kind of a question that has been asked again and again. That why in India specifically, I am aware of the context in India, that why it could not be scaled up, and if it is cumbersome, then shall we drop it, or we can also make a efficient standard operating procedure. There is a possibility of doing that, but why not to invest energies there? And I also feel that because everything has been, cities are not projects, no, cities are living organism, as it would have been said. So when you projectorize a city, no wonder this is what we get. I thank both Georg and Billy for setting the context. Now we move to the next section. This would be a series of presentations by, we would begin with Dr. Rajan was supposed to be here on behalf of Kochi. He was supposed to be representing Kochi Municipal Corporation, but somehow we are not having him today. We would still wait for him to join later in the discussion. But let us begin the presentation with Teresa Herling, followed by Cynthia Goitia, and then Pepe Irachete, if that is fine with three of you in that order. So let me have the pleasure of introducing Teresa Herling, former Joint Secretary for Urban Development in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Teresa, you are quite popular here because we have been following up this city statute in Brazil. That's something that is, I think every planner nowadays reads. At least we have been able to mainstream that in our planning education. So Teresa Herling is an architect and urban planner with a PhD in urbanism from Sao Paulo University in Brazil. Her professional career is dedicated to the formulation and implementation of public policies on urban development, social facilities, mainly schools and public spaces, and social housing. As Municipal Urban Development's Joint Secretary during 2013 to 16, she was responsible for the implementation of Sao Paulo's master plan. In the last few years, she worked as consultant in World Bank and in Cities Alliance, especially with the dissemination of experiences around Latin America and Caribbean countries. Through the Urban and Housing Practitioner Hub, UHPH, she's also urban projects teacher at Mackenzie University, Sao Paulo. These policy labs are also becoming very popular, and we are reaping the benefits of that. I must say that. Yeah, welcome, Teresa, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Aparna, and it's a pleasure to be here, and also a pleasure to talk just after Billy, because he left some questions that are very important. And I will mention them in the Brazilian case, and especially in the São Paulo case, because well, you will see just now. First of all, we will try to talk about 4 issues on the question, but the first question is that we have a legal framework at the federal level that is based on the social function of the property and the social function of city. And this is marked in our constitution and our law, a federal law called the City Statute, the Statute of the Cities. And this was a very important achievement of the civil society in Brazil during the dictatorship. And this is a result of a struggle for urban reform, and we have also for 30 years this legal framework that is now being kind of attacked by other forces, other political right forces in our country. But we have a strong legal framework that permits us to plan, to zone, to reserve some land to the poor in the cities, and to finance and regularize the possession. I will talk about these 4 issues now. The first of all is the planning. We in São Paulo have more than almost 1 million people living in precarious settlements, mostly in peripheral zones, because of this urban sprawl that George mentioned, because of this land as a good, as a merchandise, as a good that is expensive in the served zones. So the poor people went to the peripheral zones and served land to occupy them as they could. And we have now these almost 1 million households, not 1 million people, but 1 million households in this situation, and almost 4 million people, and quite a quarter of our people living in these zones. So we had the first thing that I would like to mention here is that we had an information system and an integrated planning system that was built with the support of Cities Alliance in the 2006 and 7 and 8, and that permitted us to have a whole vision of the problem in São Paulo, because we knew this, but we didn't have the facts registered in a comprehensive system, information system, and so we had this. The second thing is that this system permitted us to build an integrated planning system of social housing programs. We had programs in slum upgrading, in regularization of irregular settlements, of squatters, and building new units. And this permitted us to integrate these programs and in perimeters, in integrated action perimeters, and prioritize the interventions based on a strong information system, based on the information on existing risk areas, infrastructure, etc. This was important to align the investments at a scale that is needed to face the problem. And we had at that time in the municipal government a wealthy period with alignment of the three levels of the government. The federal level had invested a lot of money in the in the slum upgrading program, and the building of new units also with the program Minha Casa Minha Vida, My House My Life, it's called here in Brazil. And we had this federal level investments, the state government investment also aligned, and the municipal investment. So we had this, as Billy mentioned, these conditions that made this possible. The alignment of the three levels of the government, alignment of investments, and political will to do this. We didn't have this communication with the middle class and the elite class here in São Paulo that are very separated from the poor. But we had this political will from the three level of the governments to invest in these programs. We had also a legal instrument in the master plan. Since the 2000s, we had two master plans, one from 2002 and the other from 2014, the last one. And we had these social interest zones, that these special zones of social interest that market these lands, and that means in pragmatically speaking, that these people has the right to be there, they can stay there, and the public power has also the right to intervene, to make ameliorations, to make upgrading in this interventions to bring infrastructure, water, sewage, and etc. in these communities. This also preserves these communities to stay where they are and avoid the evictions. Okay, so we have instruments to regularize the possession. And we have also, for me to finish my explanation, we have also one instrument that that is important to finance these interventions, that contributes with money, with financial resources to make these programs, that is the onerous grant of the building rights. This instrument is also based in the social function of the city. That means that we had in our last master plan These red lines here are great avenues or axes of public transport that are encouraged to be densified by the real estate. So the real estate goes there, the entrepreneurs go in these areas and can build at 4 times of the area of the terrain. So they have incentives to densify the city there, to reach, for us to reach a compact city, okay? But they have to pay one tax for this additional potential to build, and this tax goes to a fund, to a public fund that is distributed to the public programs, and 30% of these funds goes to social interest housing programs. Okay, so it's a Robin Hood, like a Robin Hood with the real estate and the poor. Okay, and this is from 2040 and from now. These were the 2 instruments that I would like to mention, the 3, in fact, the system planning, the zoning, and the onerous grant of the building rights that has financed our social programs in São Paulo. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Yes, we have been studying this also quite closely, that what are the instruments that has been used there, because this seems to be quite relevant for us also. Can you hear me, or am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, this instrument that you mentioned is something that is being discussed here also in India, and in the planning community, and we are looking at it quite closely and drawing learning lessons from there. So in future, I think it would be good for us to also engage on these aspects. So I would be in touch with you, and also we would like to engage on that. Now I have the next presenter, Cynthia Goitia, Chair, Masters in Urban Economics in Torquato. I practiced it, but I still I fumbled here. Torquato de Tella University in Argentina. Cynthia Goitia is one of the most renowned urban economists in Latin America, with vast expertise in land markets, land use regulation, housing, and informality. She is professor and head of the Masters in Urban Economics at the Torquato de Tella University in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she also founded and chairs the Urban Policy and Housing Research Center. This is a leading research institution in Latin America specialized in urban policies. Professor Goitia is visiting scholar at Harvard University, University of Cambridge, LSE, and others. She is also a fellow to the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Your literature is also quite popular here. We have been reading you and following your work here. So over to you, Cynthia, for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to share my presentation. Wait a minute. Oh, it's not here. Wait a minute.
Yeah, please take your time.
Yes. You know, I have been working in land use regulation and land policies for many years. And wait a minute, I'm trying to put it. Just 1 minute. Here it is. Okay. Can you see it? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can. Can you put it into the slide mode?
Yes, yes, I will do it.
Yeah.
I will do it.
Yeah, good. All good.
Oh, this is, I think this is not, wait a minute, please. This is. Well, I was telling you that I've been working in land use regulation and planning for many years, doing research on these aspects and their effects in housing and informality. And at that time, it was the less sexist issue or subject in land policies, in policy, because people are always interested in housing, people are always interested in infrastructure, but they don't understand that land and land use regulation is a subject that cuts across all other ones. So I don't know what is happening with my presentation that I cannot
You want
share it.
present it? That's also an option.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, just take your time.
If not, I'm going to. I think here I find it. I'm sure. I'm sorry.
Ma'am, will you like us to share the presentation for you?
No, she found it. She found it.
I found it. Wait a minute, please. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm here, and you want me to put in plain mode. Do you see it?
Yeah, we do see.
Okay. Wait a minute, I'm going to try to put it here. Okay, here am I. Okay, what I'm going to talk here right now, I'm sorry for the delay. Well, I'm going to talk about the relation between land policies and informality and what we have learned in Latin America. In fact, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to start my presentation showing you a survey of urban experts in Latin America. I'm working right now in a huge project involving 17 countries in Latin America, more than 130 cities and over 400 municipalities, and trying to understand what is the impact of planning and land use regulation. I'm talking about land use regulation and enforcement in the production, in driving more or less informality. And we are doing so because in Latin America, we have a huge variation of ways in which planning is conducted in every city and every country. We have in Brazil with very innovative instruments. We have Colombia with other innovative instruments related to, for example, to land value capture and many others. So we're trying to understand what is happening in Latin America and how this can influence having more affordable land at scale. So, and then I'm going to take about a vision that we are working on slum upgrading, which is good, and it's the way we have, is something we have to do, but we also have to think about preventive policies, how land use regulation and planning can provide more affordable land at scale in order to work with this. And then I'm going to talk about some land policy instruments and informality that have an effect on informality, and Teresa makes this easier for me because she shows some of the most innovative instruments that are implemented in Brazil. So this is a snapshot of informality in this over 120 cities in Latin America with which we are working. You know, on average, these cities have 30% of people living in informality, but with a huge variation. Some cities have over 60% of people living in informality, and others have very, very low. So we want to understand in Latin America what's happening, that some cities have more people living in informal settlements and others don't. So the other thing that I want to show you is how cities and countries are dealing with informality in Latin America. And best of all, the best practice right now is what we call complete upgrading programs. That's what we are doing, integral upgrading programs. And this is the best now. But as William pointed out when he started, the effectiveness of these instruments has still been very low. And this you have in the other graph, in a scale from 1 to 10, what is the effectiveness of these instruments? And it has been very low. And so many cities and countries are trying to work on, well, what can we do better to improve? For example, we know that land titling programs alone, like what has been done in Peru, does not work very well, that we need a more comprehensive type of program. And we know that infrastructure provision is key. It's one of the key issues. So let me tell you about 3 very relevant issues. What we think right now in many countries of Latin America is that informality is not a problem of poverty. In fact, it can reinforce poverty. It's a problem, it's mainly an issue of land markets management, of how we plan, how we regulate land use, how we provide affordable land at scale, how we capture the value generated by public investment and urbanization to try to finance, for example, for infrastructure. And we try to build in these prevention policies, which I'm going here. So what are the, in this survey that we have just made in Latin America, to policy experts in Latin America, well, we asked them, well, what are the land policies that may be driving informal occupation of land? And we found that the weakness in implementation of land management instruments was the most important. Why? Because many cities have plans. But these plans sometimes are not enforced, or these plans do not have management instruments that can allow to implement them better or to finance infrastructure. So we have very beautiful drawings, very beautiful plans that wish for that and wishful thinking about what the city can be, but we don't have the tools to implement it. The other thing that seems to be valuable in many cities is that value capture instruments. Value capture instruments like the otorga onerosa, like building, like the selling of building rights, for example. Every time in a city, the government planned to improve density in some area, to change land from rural to urban land, they increase the value of land. And this value can be captured to finance all the infrastructure that's needed, all the slum upgrading programs that are needed. So what we are thinking about in cities of Latin America is that some of them are doing this type of things, others not, and we are trying to understand, well, what is the impact of this? We think that cities that are doing that, Robin Hood, as Teresa mentioned, type of programs are doing better. For example, there are many examples of capturing some part of this value to finance slum upgrading programs, or to finance infrastructure and develop affordable land for low-income population. So, and there are other things that are important. I'm going to show you here that many countries in Latin America are now implementing this type of innovative land policy instruments, some of them in all the cities and others in some part of the cities, and other countries are lagging behind. But we see a change in the way in which land policy and land policy related to informality and land policy related to slums, it's being understood. It's a new step, but I think that many cities are pushing this type of agenda. Well, I'm sorry. Here. Well, what do I suggest, or what we are thinking for Latin American cities? Well, we have to review planning and land use regulation. Land use regulation can provide exclusion, can provide, for example, minimum plot size in many cities in Argentina is 300 square meters. This makes that there is a minimum consumption level that is too high for people to afford a plot in the formal market. So you have a huge informal market selling smaller plots many parts of the city. So you have to, for example, do what are doing in Brazil, or designate land with less restrictive standards, which can provide formal land at lower prices, reduce transaction costs. Transaction costs are very high in many cities or in many countries. Mobilize the value generated by urbanization and by public investment to finance infrastructure. For example, as I mentioned, in the conversion from rural to urban land, or in additional FAR, when the city allows for additional FAI. All these things, as we have done a lot of empirical research about this in Argentina, and we found that municipalities with these instruments have less informality, are better fit to provide affordable land at scale. So, and in terms of programs, well, you know, cities have formal and informal land markets. Informality is not sometimes it's been as a romantic view about its benefits, but you have a huge informal land market with people selling plots and reaping huge benefits from that. So, well, we need to find ways to neutralize the effect of these speculative expectations. And we are in Latin America, we are trying with many of these things in an experimental way. First of all, trying different land tenure schemes. We for many years, all the multilateral organizations have put the stress the importance of property rights. Okay, property rights are really very important. Sometimes providing land titling is not the best option. So we are trying to see about community land trust, another type of instruments. The other thing is, well, make people pay affordable payments for the urban services. This is in cities that have implemented that, the informality has grown, has done better. Well, and the other thing is, we ask this public, these experts, these urban experts in Latin America, well, what are the most important urban policies that have to be reviewed post-COVID-19 in Latin America? And first of all, we have to improve infrastructure finance and the provision of service land. This is the main topic. We have to work on slum upgrading, and we have to also improve the infrastructure finance and provide and service land. As well, to prevent high density slums, and you have worked a lot about this. And the other thing is, we have to enact more realistic norms that can be obeyed, because many cities have a very exclusionary planning, in which we want a very nice city with many open space, with big plots and everything, but these are the norms that people cannot obey. So that's my first impression about the subject. And thank you for all, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a very interesting presentation, and we would have, when we have some time, to discuss these things a bit in detail. I see that Dr. Rajan is with us. So Jose, if you do not mind, then I would invite him first, and then take you, if that's fine. Dr. Rajan, I understand that you are here. Can you please switch on your camera?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, Aparna, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Let me introduce you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot switch on my video. I've tried that. Then when I hit switch on my video, like it goes off. I lose my connection. So I will just use my audio and speak. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So Dr. Rajan.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Rajan, let me just introduce you, and then you can take over. So Dr. Rajan is, we have this pleasure to work with him very closely, and he is the director of the Center for Heritage, Environment and Development for the last 18 years. And he is quite a visionary and a leader, and has been working in the realm of heritage, environment conservation and urban development, and also has been engaging in several international and academic settings. He is engaged quite actively in the city development plan preparation and other heritage and environmental conservation projects in Kochi. With this, I hand it over to you, Dr. Rajan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abanna, yeah, first of all, like, can you really hear me? I mean, I can't just hear you properly, but then I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
And first of all, I'm a big sorry for, sorry that our mayor couldn't join the function because he met with a minor accident yesterday. Like he broke his glass specs and some minor injuries. So he's not kind of attending any meeting of sort today. I'll just make a succinct summation of an ambitious housing project that is being happening in the state of Kerala. And hope you all know the state of Kerala is one of the 28 states in India. It's in the southwestern corner of India. Is supposed to be one state which stands quite above other Indian states as far as Human Development Index is concerned. And the provision of housing to all has been the objective of the government, all governments, like even the present government and all the previous governments of the state. And with this objective, like the present the state government, like it has been in power for the last 5 years, they have started a very ambitious mission called livelihood inclusion and financial empowerment. We call it life kind of a mission, livelihood inclusion and financial empowerment mission, which actually is one which is focused, a focused initiative to address the issues of housing in the state of Kerala. And for this mission, the Kudumbashree is all women self-help group and a very successful model that really supported like livelihood for a lot of women in the state. This Kudumbashree acts as a nodal agency for this very ambitious program of the government, and which represents a convergence of schemes from various, the Life Mission kind of represents a convergence of the schemes from various departments, and when like, Government of India sponsors schemes like PMA is like Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, and they have urban, rural, and we use the urban, and I think, and this mission, this Life Mission provides housing for the landless, houseless, poor, along with a comprehensive rehabilitation program that aims at a sustainable livelihood through skill development, leading to financial self-reliance and ensuring inclusive development. The activities of this mission, the Life Mission, are structured in 3 phases, actually, 3 phases. And in the first phase, the mission address the issue of incomplete houses, the houses that are in dilapidated or bad condition, like government really help the people to kind of get it repaired and make it livable, and kind of government completed that aspect, like and now the second phase of the mission kind of provides financial assistance for constructing houses for those who have own land, land. And in the second phase, like in the first phase, like almost entire state was covered, like almost everyone who are like looking for some assistance for getting their houses repaired or like making it livable kind of government kind of provided support to all. And the second phase, which where the mission or the government provides financial assistance for constructing houses for those who own land. And I think through that scheme, like till date, more than 2.5 lakh. I mean, Aparna, you can just say it's 0.2 million for the audience who don't understand lakhs, but it is almost 2.5, 2.6 million houses have been built by the government in the last 4.5 years. It's not even 4.5, 3.5, 4 years. And it's for the people who own land, small little pieces of land. And Kerala is one state which do not have many landless people. Most of the people own some land because of the land form that, like in the first, the left socialist government in 1957 introduced. Like, we had a massive land reform that was enacted by the first socialist. And I would say they were communist in name, but they were more of socialists and social democrats. And they introduced this land reform, which many other parts of India did not witness. And through that, like, land reform process, like, most of people of Kerala were owners of land. And, like, those who did not have like house on their own land, like the government built almost 2.6 million houses in the last 3.5 years. And that is actually a revolution of sort. We never expected a government to do, especially in the context of this state witnessed two massive flooding and landslides in consecutive years. And now, like, last whole 1 year when because of COVID situation. And against this backdrop, like, severe setback, like, the government is determined to give houses to all, and then government has completed that big mission. And now we are the third phase of the mission, and this phase is like, rehabilitation of landless beneficiaries of the state, those who do not have land, and most of them are like, migrants, recent migrants, and those who do not have land because of some other reasons, like 50% of local people, and 50% of them are migrants. And now the government, like, as far as life mission, government kind of conducted a survey, and through the survey they have kind of identified almost more than 3.3 million beneficiaries, or like, we have identified 3.3 landless, homeless in the state. I wouldn't say identified, like, we made a list, and then the state government did a thorough verification of this beneficiary list through software, through using some software and other thing, and now we have identified almost 1.5 million beneficiaries as eligible for housing, kind of in I think, like, during by 3rd of October 2020, we had identified almost 1.4. It was not 1.5, 1.4 million beneficiaries, and they would be provided housing, land and housing. Soon government started doing it, and the other, like, 1 lakh list would also be given housing very soon. The mission is actually planning to rehabilitate these beneficiaries into housing complexes, like, because Kerala is the entire state is only kind of 38,000 square kilometer, which we have like highland, which is not very habitable in that way, and then we have coastal area. Because of flooding, we cannot also provide housing in that coastal area, so we have to provide houses mainly into the midland area. So, and that is one reason we are like planning to kind of give all these beneficiaries housing complexes, multi kind of flat kind of system. And like we would also, and among these there are people who can purchase land in areas, and we would also provide, if they can purchase their own land in through some schemes and programs, and we would be giving them land housing very soon. In Kerala, in the state of Kerala, in 2010, we have launched another ambitious project for the migrant workers, and I would say Kerala is one state which attracts a lot of migrants, and we have migrants who speak different languages, and we the government of Kerala, the present government, it is again a socialist communist social government, which call them as our guest workers, and there are a lot of scheme for the migrant workers. They are the backbone of the state, and the state government launched the migrant workers welfare scheme, and which has several provisions for the welfare of the migrant workers. And under there is this government department called labor and skill, and we have devised many programs for giving houses and skill and employment all for these people. And then also we have used an Awas insurance, Awas in these home or house, and Awas insurance scheme in 2016. Apnagar is again a Hindi word. It's your own home for the migrant workers, because many of these migrants speak Hindi. And and these are the two major initiatives of the government as far as migrant workers are concerned. And Apnagar, this my own or our own house scheme will be providing interstate, like in or what we call guest workers, with the decent housing and amenities at a very affordable rate. And it started in a place called Palakkad, is the border district of Tamil Nadu and other part of Kerala. And now it is being expanded to in our city, in Kochi. In our city, Kochi is a city with a lot of migrant workers, a lot of serious housing issues. And Kochi is one city in the state of Kerala. They have slums in the proper definition, which falls under the proper definition, because slums in Mumbai, slums in Kochi or Kerala wouldn't really like the kind of, or it's not like the slums in Mumbai. They are much better off. But then we have a couple of slums, 2 or 3 or slums in Kochi, and all others are like impoverished neighborhoods, not as such. And under this migrant workers scheme, a separate fund was created under the Kerala Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare. We have a welfare board called Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Board for the welfare of migrant workers. And education and health support is also available for, and we register all these people, and we give them education and healthcare support. And in a nutshell, what I would say is that the state government is being very proactive and very socially conscious, and they are doing a lot of work for the marginalized, the marginalized people, migrant and the landless, and I would say, you can really call Kerala that way a real welfare state. And but if you really talk about say housing, we have a lot of issues. It's not that we don't really have issues, and there are a lot of lack of there is a method of dealing with encroachment is one thing. A lot of people who do not have land, they encroach upon others' land or government land, but then we really don't have a proper method to or humanely approach this encroachment issue, without really hurting the poor people. Sometimes police, they have brute force, but the government immediately mainly under the instruction or directive of the court that the police acts, there are people who own this land, encroached upon land, they approach the court would direct the police act up immediately, and then there are issues like that. And then we have also issues of title deeds, And a lot of land tenure and title deed issues are there. Very much we'll have to settle we'll have to fix a lot of issues in this regard. And then rental, again, like rental housing, again, like, it's not like, especially for the migrant workers, they really do not have basic amenities. They don't really provide the basic amenities. So there are issues, but issues are only 10% compared to the positive things that the government has been doing, especially in the last 4.5, 5 years. Aparna, with this, I would kind of end my short note. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Rajan, for your words. Kerala is definitely an outlier. And one of the questions that I was browsing in the chat was that, what happens when you do not have mayor in cities? Because I think Latin Americans are quite used to having mayors who are quite powerful and are making decisions. But in Kerala is an aberration where we do have a mayor who leads a city. So if it can happen there, I think it can also happen elsewhere in the same country. So maybe it would be also interesting to study, why it happens there and not happens in other cities. So for India, I think we do not only have to study Latin America and see why mayors are strong there, but I think we have our homegrown example in Kerala, and Kochi mayor is definitely a decision maker. So maybe there are learnings there. With
Yeah.
this, I thank you, Dr. Rajan, and I have now the uh, privilege of inviting Jose Irachete, and I think you are popularly known as Pepe, which is easy. Is an economist and a PhD in public affairs, specialized in urban and metropolitan environmental policy from Indiana University, Bloomington. He has specialized in policy analysis and evaluation on topics related to urban land, urban and metropolitan development, mobility, and air quality in cities. He has more than 13 years of experience in policy analysis. He is co-author of UN Habitat's report of prosperity of the cities in Mexico and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia National Report. Um, he currently serves as the Director General of the Mexican National Institute of Sustainable Land, INSUS, for its, I have to figure out what is the acronym as such, but it is, I think I understand it is National Institute of Land, Mexico. So with this word, I hand it over to you. Please make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. I'm gonna share my screen. I hope you can see it.
Please.
Okay. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, you are good to go, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank INHAF, Cities Alliance, and the German Corporation for the invitation to this webinar. It's been really interesting. And I'm going to start my presentation giving you some basic information about the problems of land and urban land in Mexico. So you have this background before moving on into my the actual policies that we're implementing in my country. So we currently have around 7.5 million houses that are in condition of irregularity. This means that they don't have a tenure title, they don't have this secure land, and therefore they are exposed to many problems that could cause this not having a title. So the rate of growth of this problem is around 90,000 families every year, which means every decade we have around 1 additional million houses or plots of land that suffer from this problem of not having a title, a property title to secure their tenure. If we extrapolate this number to the number of people that inhabit in these houses, we estimate that we have around 30 million people living in these conditions. This represents around 23% of total population in Mexico. So we're talking about, 23, 25% of people suffering from problems arising from the not Mexico's government and the general, in general, the state not controlling the use of land and how cities grow and move forward. So what have we done as a country? So keep in mind, I'm working at the federal level, so I have a view from the entire country, not for a specific city or municipality. So these perspectives go from the national level. So we have three main policy documents that serve as the framework for all policy related to land and urban development. The first one is the National Strategy of Spatial Planning. So in Spanish, we actually call it territorial planning, but this is not a common word in English. So I came out with this alternative, spatial planning. I hope it's clear enough. And this is a general framework that establishes how we want the country to grow on a regional and on a metropolitan level, not the specific municipality or the locality, but as a country as a whole. This is the main guideline to order the territory on a more specific ground that is developed on different policy and planning instruments. The second large program is the National Housing Program. And here I have to say we just published this program about 1 year ago. And this is the first one in the world that considers the 7 UN Habitat Adequate Housing criteria. I'm gonna mention those are in the PowerPoint, but these 7 components are, I believe, a change in the paradigm about housing. The first one is to have a legal security of tenure, availability of services, materials, and infrastructure, affordability, habitability, accessibility, location or good location, and cultural adequacy. So taking into account these 7 criteria, the new housing program is pushing for a reconception of how the housing and land market works in Mexico. Here's another background information. Mexico produced about 15 million new houses in the past 20 years. This is a really large number of housing units. However, they were produced outside the cities with no connection to the urban core, with no public transportation, with poor quality public services. So we actually created a larger problem than what we had before. Now we don't only have this need for new houses or for a housing solution, it doesn't have to be new, but we also have these new developments that are not adequate and we now have to deal with them. So that's why we have a focus now on land policy, so we can push policies and developments where we want them to be, not only where the land is cheaper as it happened before. So the third policy, this large policy document is the National Land Policy. This document states the national guidelines for decision-making at the state and local level. The federal government in Mexico does not have a direct hand on deciding how land use and urban development is happening. That is a job for the local governments mainly. But as the federal government, we can put forward this kind of guidelines to support this decision making, and that is exactly what we're doing. And some of the main characteristics of this document are the following. First, we want to balance the benefits and costs of cities development. In the traditional paradigm of urban development, usually few landowners and developers take most of the benefits of the city in terms of real estate business, and the city charges or has to take the costs of this development. So what we want now is to balance these two, this combination of benefit and cost. The second term is to guarantee the right to the city for everyone. As you know, there's this chart of the right to the city that's been circulating in our world for more than a decade now. This hasn't translated into actual policies in many countries. That is the case of Mexico. So we want to use this as an additional guideline for the decision making. And finally, implementing land policies and instruments to manage the urban land and to finance cities development. This is using these instruments that we have talked before, that Cynthia talked before, and we are starting to implement these instruments in many cities in Mexico. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on the national land policy because I believe this is a game changer for urban development in Mexico. We identified 7 strategic challenges. The first one is to recover the social and environmental function of urban land and property. The second one is to contribute to the planning of sustainable and resilient cities. The third strategic challenge is to update the slum upgrade policies. We have upgrade policies that date to many decades ago, so we need to put forward new policies to address current challenges that have changed a lot in the past 1 or 2 decades. The fourth strategic challenge is to manage urban land to fulfill the most pressing land and housing needs. The fifth is to manage territorial information and data for decision making. The sixth strategic challenge is to advance toward land governance. This point is particularly relevant since Mexico is a federation. So we have this decentralized government, this autonomous government at the state level and also at the municipal level. So to make them work together, to be able to work together for metropolitan areas, for instance, and to work the 3 different levels of government, it has been really challenging. So we are focusing on how to improve this governance and how to implement instruments that allow to make a better decision making, especially at the metropolitan level. And finally, the last strategic challenge is to promote the implementation of land management and urban development financing instruments. These are the kind of instruments that we talked before. Most of the revenues for local governments in Mexico come from the federal government. So the local governments are really weak. They have low potential to collect taxes, for instance. And this translates into a lack of general capabilities to actually control the urban development in their territories. So now I want to talk about 2 of the main programs that we're implementing in Mexico in order to tackle these problems. The first one is the Urban Improvement Program. It's called Mi México Late, Programa de Mejoramiento Urbano, which means my Mexico is beating, and this is the Urban Improvement Program. This has 4 legs, this program, to address all different kinds of problems that we see in slums. The first one is to build and recover public space and community infrastructure. I will show you in a little bit some pictures about this public works, because the aim is to recover these really torn down and worn down areas, and the main recovery comes from public space. So people can actually regain their access to public space and make it of their own, and to build these social linkages. The second leg of this program is the housing improvement. We have some revenue to enlarge houses where they are too small, to improve the materials or the quality of the construction. So we're doing. The third one is securing land tenure. As I said at the beginning, we have about 7.5 million houses without land tenure. So we do it through this program. And the fourth one is advancing local urban planning. Many of these municipalities do not have planning documents, so we want to make this integral, and the ways to put together these 4 legs. The main characteristic of this program, which is, I believe, the most important, is that all these 4 legs are applied in the same areas. So we are not just passing resources to different areas of the city, but we are focusing on specific neighborhoods. And this has the largest impact that we have identified so far. And the other program is the land management program. So this is the other side of this problem. The first one is to recover where we already have slums. The second program, the land management one, is aiming at reducing the growth of these slums. So tackling the root of the problem. And the main idea behind this program is to create land, especially for the urban poor, so they have an alternative that they can afford and is adequate for them, instead of moving or living to a slum. So we want to stop the growth of slums by providing alternatives for them to live in. And the characteristics of the projects that we are implementing through this program are the following. First is mixed function project. We have all kinds of mixture in these urban developments, which means we have mixed land use, we have mixed income strata. This is really relevant. So we don't want to have only poor people living in one area and rich people living in a different area. We want to improve this mixture and the people living together and creating stronger social networks. And the third one is mixed housing typology. So we don't have all houses looking the same. We want different types of housing, different densities, different heights, and different kinds of houses in general. Also, we have a special focus here on land creation and supply for the urban poor. As I said, the main goal is to provide land for this group of income people. And the third one is in-house generated economic activity, which means that the economic activity is created within the project. So people don't have to commute or to move to different areas to have a job, or just to be able to provide for their family. And the last one is that takes advantage of land-based financial instruments. So we want to finance all the infrastructure and all the public facilities and the social facilities within the project, with the financial revenues that the actual project creates. So we use them to finance the needs for the people living inside the project. And here I want to show you some of the interventions that we had this past year. These are 3 different kinds of interventions: a park, a large social facility in the left, and on the right, a public space where a lot of the people of the community get together. And this is an area where they can exchange their knowledge and talk to each other, and make and build these social interrelations. So I would like to stop here, but I'm going to be here in case there's any doubt or comment that you would like to make to this presentation. Thank you, Aparna.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. Thanks for your presentation. And I think although we have overshot the time, what we have thought we would be doing, there is a last segment of this particular discussion that we have, and all your points that you have made, is like including public spaces. During the pandemic, I think the use of public spaces and how it unifies the city has come to the forefront very much. So I think the points that you are making are all, we are experiencing are all valid, and we need to do this, but how is the big question. So now we um, invite Shirish Patel ji, Jose Yu, Cynthia, and Teresa. Um, and I think Dr. Rajan excused himself. Jose, would you please also switch on your video. Dr. Rajan, hi, Dr. Rajan. That's a nice thing about about this digital platform. It humanizes, it humanizes and it allows us to also see the family, and it's nice. I feel very good about it. Um, so we
Thank
move
you.
to the we move to the next segment of the presentation, where we would like to do a discussion, and I actually made it for half an hour, but I think we are going to go a bit over time than 8 o'clock. I request, I could also see the number of participants falling down, because it's 8 in the evening here. It's a dinner time in India, so and I can understand that. But I would just say I would like to do it quickly, so that we kind of conclude whatever we just saw in the presentation, and make a sense out of it. Um, as William said, the rhetorics of the mayor are not important. It is how it translates in the budget. So Dr. Rajan is having his budget meeting, and he asked me, what should I do? Shall I stay here or shall I go for the budget meeting? And I just said, please go for the budget meeting. Secure the budget. All these things can go on, but get the budget right, get the money, and then we would see to it. So Dr. Rajan is not going to be here with us. It's a pity, because it would have been lovely to get the voice of Kochi Corporation in this. So with these words, let's move to the next segment. I invite first Shirish Patel. Let me introduce him, because we didn't give him the time to make a presentation as such. But I think we can have his introduction. So he is an civil engineer with deep interest in urban affairs, and he writes very regularly. And he was appointed as a director of planning and works, in charge of planning, design, and implementation of the new city when CITCO was formed. And he has extensively written on the urban affairs. He is right now finishing a book, Six Metros, which compares London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Delhi, and Mumbai, to see what these cities can learn from each other. I think it's a very ambitious and very interesting project. All the best, sir, for you, for that to you. And we really look forward to this particular, book of yours. So with this, I would move to the next segment. So the how I have structured is that, first I would tell you, how, what was the idea behind this webinar. And then I have formulated two guiding questions. So the first question would be to Cynthia and Shirish Patel ji. And the next question is for Pepe and Teresa for you. So I would do it like that. And we have half an hour to kind of take this forward. So the idea that came is that, we have been always talking about that whether there is any impact of land policies in reducing poverty or not. So there are two school of thoughts here. One is that, it is being said, what's the point in having land policy and all this, sanitary plans, because it is not really doing anything with the poverty reduction. But the scholars and the research, especially in India, I have been reading a lot of work by Bhuvaneshwari Raman, Solomon Benjamin, and also Ananya Roy. They have been saying that there is an impact of land policies in reducing poverty. And when I saw, Cynthia, your presentation, and I've been reading your literature, I think it is quite convincing, and I think we need to look into it more detail in India on this part of it. And whether we can use, land is actually a central role in any urban policy, but it is a very sensitive, it's very contentious, and as all of you have said it, it is something that requires different kind of a handling. Now, subsuming the land quotient under housing may be misleading. And now this is the point that I want to make. The moment we enter the land quotient through the housing window, it becomes a very different narrative than when we look at land, when we look at urban poverty, when we situate it with the wider politics of the way in which we build our cities. It's a two different thing. And I think that's where the focus I would like to bring back on, that what is your opinion on that? If you do not enter it through the housing. This I say based on my experience of implementing housing for the poor projects in few states, where we found that, like building housing is not a problem. It's not a technological issue. It is not the question of capacity on that. Like what Jose just said, I built more houses, but their houses are not located where they were supposed to be located. So, it's a question of how does one then make the land available? Can land use planning be an instrument that can be one of the ways of negotiating these barriers? Is that possible? Because we are convinced, like I am at least convinced, that constructing the superstructure is not the problem. The problem is, where do you build it on? And in India right now, we are having this conversation whether to make a statutory plan or not, and whether as statutory plan never works, what's the point in making it? So out of the 8,000 cities that we have, we only have 2,500 master plans. We do not have master plans for all cities, and not that everything is getting updated. Only 100 cities are updating the master plans, and how much of that is really having some connection with the ground reality is also a question. So what I want to kind of pose this thing that whether this is relevant or not, whether land policies are able to kind of impact on the poverty. That's the kind of a framework we are using it here. So I first come to Shirish Patelji and Cynthia to talk about that, in urban areas, land is treated as a commodity. So it is a commodity. Let's face the fact, it is a commodity. However, in cities, most poor are not accessing land through the market. They are accessing land through social or political or other kinds of negotiations. They are not purchasing it, or they are not accessing it through the market. Now, if that is so, and that is the way the global south is built, what is against this background, against this, where you do not have master plans, we do not have legislation, what do you think that should we invest? What is the relevance of statutory plans and land planning instruments? And what is your experience? So I would like to know, Cynthia, you first, that what has been your experience? Are you convinced with these instruments? And then I would like to go to Shirish Patelji, that what do you say, sir? Well, like, what is your opinion? That should we invest in it, or we have to discover a different paradigm? So Cynthia,
okay,
first.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me tell you something, and let me include something that what you have said. We have formal and we have informal land markets. Many people are not obtaining housing through the formal land market, but they are restoring to the informal land market. And many times they are paying for it, and they are paying high prices for this. So both markets are very much integrated. So what we do in the formal market can surely impact in the informal market. So you ask me, well, do we need plans? Yes, we need to enact better plans, but those that can be implemented and enforced. And what is inside that plan is what really matters, because you can have plans that can be very inclusive, or you can have plans which we have in many other cities that are very, very exclusive. So what are the tools and the instruments that make them inclusive or exclusive are the key subject that we need to talk here. Because if not, we are going to find some, as many cities have, very nice plans with many elitist regulation, which can constrain land supply and affordability. So that makes people to restore to the informal land markets where plots are affordable, where they are very bad located, where they have very bad transportation, and all the things that Pepe was telling about what they are trying to reverse in Mexico. So I think that what are the types of minimum plot size? What is the FAR? What are how you finance infrastructure? For example, it's amazing that what's happening in Indian cities, which is the same that happens in many Latin American cities. Cities are growing very fast, and there is a huge deficit of infrastructure. And the paradox of that is that the value that's generated by providing infrastructure, it's more than the cost of providing it. So you can invest in providing infrastructure and reap some of the valorization or the capitalization in land value that is generated by this investment to finance it. So we cannot explain why many cities are not trying to finance infrastructure by capturing the value that it generates. So that is a very important thing. So the issue is not the plan itself. The issue is also what is inside this plan and what are the instruments that we have to do that. And many times cities are investing a lot in many places and are not able to mobilize that type of investment that increase land prices and that can solve many of the huge problems that we have in our cities. For example, Teresa shows us how selling building rights, additional building rights, can provide for resources for slum upgrading. You do not have to forget that slum upgrading, you need a huge investment for doing that. And many governments do not have the resources to do that, neither at the national, provincial, or local level. So how urban development and how the planning can help and provide for this, it's one of the main topics that we need to discuss. I think that with this I finished.
Yeah, no, I take your point, but I think the discussion that keeps happening here, that who is planning and who is included and who is not included while making those decisions. So although you are saying that it is for financing infrastructure, we have to capture those values, but what infrastructure and those infrastructure for whom, until unless it is discussed and I think everybody is taken on board, maybe the lobbying for making a plan does not go far. So I understand your point, but I would now shift to Shirish that, Shirish, what do you say? Like in India, why don't we make a plan? What is it? Why there is so much of resistance for not making a plan? Because we are not making a plan and there seems to be a resistance towards that. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aparna. I think before we get to the question of making a plan, we need to understand that land is not a commodity like other commodities. The normal rules of supply and demand, those curves do not apply to land. Not only because land is fixed in quantity, whereas commodities can vary according to demand, but also because its value depends on two factors. One is location, and the other is use and intensity of use. Now, given this, let's also understand that when land is owned by government, it is owned by the people of the country. It is to be shared and used for the benefit of the people of the country. It's not to be monetized. That's not the best use to which land is to be put if it is government land. Once it's private land, the situation is different. Now, with government land, you find that there is a certain amount of it which is off the market. Streets are off the market, Parks are off the market, schools are off the market, public hospitals are off the market. Similarly, I think land for low-income housing should be off the market. When the British built bungalows, they built servants' quarters in the compounds of those bungalows. They did not expect their servants to live miles away and commute to work. So I think land for low-income housing should be part of the land that is taken off the market and dealt with differently. The way to deal with it and to avoid price competition for it is to give that land to what is called a community land reserve. That is an entity which is a trust or a non-profit company which owns the land, but not the structures that are built on it. Those structures are built by the occupants. They can sell those structures when they leave, but they cannot realize anything in regard to the appreciation in value of the land which belongs to the community land reserve. So if you do that, if you take that land off the market, I think you'll go a long way towards solving this problem of low-income housing well distributed throughout the city. Plans, when you draw them up, take no account of all this, and they are then rendered absolutely irrelevant by market forces.
Yeah, but I think the discussion then goes to that, we are trying to, like, I understand what you're saying, the community land trust, where we do not have individual property rights regime, but we have a community rights regime, that we understand. But then it gets into the housing discussion. What I'm trying to bring it back, that even to say that we are not promoting individual property rights, but we are promoting community land trust, you require certain kind of a decision and through policies, through some legislation. Because right now, if one is promoting private property regime, you cannot just say that this should be done, but this should be done how? That's the question. And that how is basically, we do have instruments. For example, zoning is a fantastic instrument, but we are not using it for doing the zoning for, say, economically weaker section people. Like we are not doing that. We are not zoning the slums. So my question is that, like, do you think that we should get into the housing part of it and then get into the, deep into it, or shall we zoom out and look at a city and say that, okay, these are the possible instruments that we can use, and then get into the housing quotient, because it is more than the housing quotient. I think who has the possibility of using land for their own economic benefits and use it as an asset. They can claim over the city's land. That's the main asset. So I somehow kind of feel that the moment we get into this housing quotient, then the land case quotient somehow gets lost, and like we are then not doing the spatial planning or the what you call territorial planning, but then we are trying to get into the housing part of it.
Let me answer your question. I'm sorry. The main thing is that plans also have instruments for providing land for affordable housing. So a good plan, for example, many cities in some countries have inclusionary zoning. So everyone who builds housing in that place have to provide a certain share of the plot or a certain share of units to build affordable housing. So we need to include them in the vision of the plan. How we set aside land for affordable housing, how the current the private development can help to provide additional land and units for affordable housing. So this is part of a good plan, or a plan also have instruments for doing that, and those are very much related to land and how you work with that.
Yeah. So, sir.
I don't think you can talk about housing without, first solving the problem of affordable transit. I think transit across the city is as fundamental to housing as the construction of the housing itself. transit and amenities are basic before you can think of providing housing. So if you're talking about which comes first, worrying about housing or worrying about planning, I would say it's very clear. You have to plan the transit lines and the connections. You have to plan the amenities, and the housing follows.
Yes, I agree. I'm totally in agreement with what Mr. Patel posed before. I understand that land for certain uses is not, should not be treated as a good, as a commodity, because it has the suction. We must look at the social function of the city, and we must, especially in those societies with a very strong inequality, we have to rebalance the accessibility to the amenities, to infrastructure, to possibilities of achieving a job and the public transport, etc., etc. And this is not equal if we understand that the land is a commodity and who has money to pay for it, okay, is well located in the city, and who has not the money is submitted to live in the peripheral zones without these amenities. No, if we have, but we have to have a common agreement, a social agreement. And nowadays, especially in Brazil, we have a very divided society, and we don't have this social agreement to what is the main objective of a master plan. For instance, we have now the revision, the review of the master plan. In this year, the new municipality administration will put into the discussion the review of this master plan, and the real estate entrepreneurs want the no regulation of the land, no regulation, no fund for this Robin Hood fund, no nothing. And we don't have a majority of, and we don't have a consensus in the society that this is not good for the poor. So I think we have to establish a common view of the problem with the society, as Billy mentioned before, with the support of the medium classes, of the elite, but especially among the poor, to struggle for these rights, because land is not a commodity for the poor. It's a right. It's the right to the city. I understand this. And so we don't have conditions to put a social housing program in the land with the society if we don't have land. We don't have to separate these policies, because without land, without the instruments to regularize the tenure, we cannot serve the poor in their slums. Okay, they are always threatened by the advance of this real estate entrepreneurs, and so I think this is it's a very complex issues we have.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Teresa, because you kind of moved to the next question that I was about to ask you, is that the which you answered right now, that like when you say that land having a social function, okay, and you as a society as a whole you decide on that, but now the society is never homogeneous. Everybody would have their own interest. Now the instruments are basically guiding those kind of a ideology. Like for example, if Shishir Bhai says that land is not a commodity, but that sentence has to be kind of, legislated somewhere, or has to be written somewhere, that, when it comes to doing the land as a for the poor, it is not, it is off the market. Okay, but that has to be done. So if you have a kind of a instrument that kind of, codifies this, you require this. Otherwise, if you do not have it, if you when the leadership changes, you can be in for a very difficult time, because it is not codified. So all I'm asking is that, this, when you say land as a social function, should we trust the social contract and depend on that, or shall we try to legislate it, make it as a instrument, and then implement it, so right now, for example, if you do not have a master plan, how do you do the capturing of the value? Because it is
Sure.
not so that is the first step, no? So now that's what the question that I'm asking is that, like, is there a benefit in doing that? If there is a benefit, that's the first step, that there is an agreement that is codified, that is legislated, and then you can go on doing the negotiation. So Dr. Rajan is not here with us, but this entire idea of land as a social function, I would like to now go to Jose. What do you think? How does it implemented in Mexico? Does it happen? Because right to city is not what government of India has said, that they are not as yet, there's no consensus on that. In 2016, there was a lot of debate, but the right to city is still not accepted. But Jose, what's the scene from Mexico? What do you think? Is right to city and land as a social function has a future there?
Well, it's a really complicated question. The social function of and environmental function as well of land and property is a great idea that I think all the experts and practitioners have in their minds, but the implementation is really tricky. I would say that the implementation, or how to identify what this social function is a hard task, and the only way to find it is through the process of finding it. It's not that someone says this is what we should be doing, this is a social function. It's a process on how we move until attaining this idea. And this social function should be in the shape of a master plan, but not just as a technical planning document, but as Teresa was saying something similar, this should be a social agreement, a social pact, but the only way to achieve this pact is through a process, or more explicitly, a democratic process in which all the main components and actors of the city take part, and between all, decide what the city should look like. Now, I know this sounds really naive, but this shouldn't be the case. It is possible to attain this higher level planning process that should move toward the social function. And in general, the social function should be something that every decision that is made should work for the benefit of the community, and not only for the benefit of a particular or a private actor, which means every decision that is made regarding land or urban development should be helpful for the community, and not only the one that is pushing that decision, which is usually how it happens. Now, you mentioned something, Aparna, about, or someone, that the land for the poor is usually off the market. I would agree, but I think this is just a traditional view of how markets work, because actually the land for the poor could be profitable from the private perspective. However, we don't have this interrelationship between the private sector, the public sector, and the people that should be the beneficiary of these decisions. And I think we should move forward toward that interrelation, because this should not necessarily be a separated part. I agree, it cannot be left for the private sector, the government and the public sector must have a strong hand deciding on how things move. But what I'm saying is that these should not necessarily be totally separated. They could be really coupled together, and this would provide a different alternative and would be providing land and housing solutions for the poorest of the poor, for the slum dwellers that we have in all of our cities.
Okay, so the two questions that I framed is that, one is that whether we can use legislations and instruments, and does it have an impact on the urban poverty if you have a good one. And the second question was this thing about, the social function of land, like how do we interpret it and how do we do it if we do not have a instrument or if we do not have a legislation on that. So with these two questions, I think I would like to wind up with only a very quick reaction from all of you. What I want to understand that, do you really believe, because something that you are convinced about may not be the, may not be the universal truth, that land policies actually in urban poverty is sometimes the outcome of the regressive land policies and not the other way around. So do you think regressive land policies creates urban poverty, and it's not that they are poor as far as such, but they are being created poor because you have these regressive land policies? Um, I would like to start with Teresa, or maybe Cynthia, you can go ahead. What do you think?
Yes, I totally agree with that. I totally agree of that the informality is not an issue of poverty itself. It's an issue of land markets management, and I told you when I start my presentation. And I think that making people live in places where they lack all the opportunities, very far, without infrastructure and many other things, is that the main cause of poverty. People are not poor, or maybe may have maybe low income people, but most of all, they are lacking all the opportunities that cities give by living without infrastructure in very poor locations and so forth. So I think that we need to think on land policies to reverse poverty itself.
Shirish Bhai, your reactions, please.
Oh, yes, obviously, I think land policy drives poverty downwards. There's no question of that. It may not be the sole cause of poverty, but it certainly drives it deeper.
Okay. Teresa?
Yes, I agree.
You agree, okay.
Yes, the land is a central point of the poverty reduction.
Jose, what's your opinion on this? You think there is a need to go out of the housing discourse and bring it that in the land policy should be the one? Like, it's not either or this or that, I'm never saying that it's either this or that, but how does one balance it? Because the land questions are usually not in the main discourse. Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. Land is the base. Housing occurs upon the land. If we don't have a proper land management instruments and tools, there's no way we can fix the housing problem or the urban development problem. We need to start on the base, which is land. And also land is the main provider of financing and resources to put forward everything else. So for sure, we need to start by the land.
Thank you. In my enthusiasm, I forgot to introduce Anandita. She's my old colleague, so I think sometimes I have got so used to her that I forget that I have to also introduce her. So Anandita, for the sake of time, I would not read out your CV because we can post it in the chat. But Anandita is an economist, and she is been working on these issues for now some years. And she also has her strong points. And she is believing in spatial planning more than any of the urban planners. So I think that's also a good victory for us that we have one economist talking about spatial planning. So Anandita, before I give it to you to summarize, I got to see from Anna Claudia that there are some questions from the in the chat box, and this is a question that has come from Archita Panesar, that how can we make urban land markets more competitive for efficient use of strategies and targeting affordable housing? This is a question that has been targeted, that has been addressed to Cynthia, but I don't see Cynthia right now. Maybe we can drop this question, and now Dr. Rajan also is not here. This is a question from Renu Khosla. What would you say is the fundamental difference between the PM housing program and life? Okay, this can be answered. We can answer that. So Renu ji, I would explain this to you, this because we have all the literature on this and we can do it. So Dr. Rajan also can talk about it. And then Soumya has a question. Adding on to the question by the anchor, the dominant narrative of built spaces as valuable, but what about the importance of non-built and non-colonized landscape for ecological and social well-being for the urban community, especially in the context of urban flooding and other disasters? Yes, I think it's a good question that, how do you add value to each and every pixel of urban land? It is not possible. So it's not the money, it's not that monetary value only. Looking at the watch, I would now give it to Anandita for your summing up, so that we have now reduced from 117 to 52. So before we become zero, I think we need to also have some conclusions. Yeah, over to you, Anandita.
Thank you so much, Aparna. And it's quite difficult to sum up such a interesting discussion that we have been having for past now 2 hours. So thank you everyone for your presentations and very interesting insights and provocations that the concept of slum upgrading needs at the moment, especially in the context of India as we build back post-pandemic. And many of the countries, Mexico and other Latin American countries, actually have set the stage by taking housing as the building back process to create forward and backward linkages, which would generate not only jobs, but has the potential to really revive the economy post the pandemic situation. The informality as a function, land informality, which exacerbate the poverty, is a very important takeaway from this discussion. And we have also the plans that can be exclusionary and inclusionary are both the points that we have to keep in mind while we go forward for planning at a large scale. I think the points that Billy was mentioning about large scale slum upgrading program and its ability to really create, what should I say, as a bedrock for a sustained program intervention and also a preventive course of action for addressing slums and urban poverty in cities towards building inclusive city. I was very, very happy to hear Billy's provocation on the inclusion of middle class in the discourse. I think that's and the political elites, as he mentioned, would be very, very important. And maybe the next tomorrow's discussion can touch upon few of these issues, as housing shortage is kind of staggered at each level, and thus any built housing supply kind of gets usurped by the higher income categories for the urban poor. So that's something very important. And also in case of India, we have been seeing that self-built housing is what urban poor housing is usually self-built. And that's why slum upgradation programs are very important and very contextual in Indian case. I would give you an example of Orissa and also followed by Punjab. Both states are now planning to take up slum upgrading at a large scale. Orissa has kind of pioneered the or shown the way. A very interesting convergence for Orissa that I think has a long way to go is also to take this slum upgradation opportunity to build in urban wage employment initiative where the slum people actually build their own infrastructure, which has a very sustainable way of creating jobs and accommodating poor and marginalized within the city. So that's, I think, a very important way forward that we see that has learnings for all of us going forward. And also the slum upgrading program somehow under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the BLC, the beneficiary-led construction, the housing subsidy, kind of taken over the slum upgradation dialogue. And more because the BLC was so much success, I think the learning from all of you, there is a need for putting planning at the center of deciding those public housing subsidy schemes and making it more relevant as we go forward. That kind of sums up. I haven't able to touch upon very interesting points of open data sources, data for planning, and the social pact between the landowners and the users, for that matter. As Shirish Bhai pointed out, that the landowners, if they are government, it should be off the market. Thank you for this very, very exciting and insightful discussion. And I think it perfectly connects the dot to tomorrow's discussion of how slum upgrading can cater to the needs of urban poor in the compact city building and resilient city building context. Thank you, Aparna.
Thanks, Anindita, for summing up. And I think this discussion has to 2.5 hours is not enough for this discussion, because I always feel that again and again we kind of slip into the same housing discussion, and we still do not. The question that I've been always asking is that why can't we make the statutory plans? Why cannot have an agreement that let's make the statutory plans, let's make an agreement on that, and then the other things would follow. But I don't think we have to resolve every issue right now. There is a time for us to do that. And with this, I must say that this discussion has been very interesting and also enriching for me personally and for others also, I'm assuming. And we need to do this kind of exchanges more often, and making urban poverty, that question of urban poverty, and bringing it back to the land policies would be, I think, we are doing the next thing tomorrow only. But Kirtiji, I think we need to discuss this in a much longer and a much more in a series, and we have to make it a bit more. I would say, take each segment and then start talking about it and figuring it out. So with this, I hand it over to Kirtiji. Maybe you should have the last word and then conclude on that.
Yes, thank you very much. My last word is very long, but there is not much time, so I'll be very, very brief. But I think I just wanted to go back to two things. And that is two very important questions that were asked. First question is what my dear friend Dunu asked. And I think he asked this context of poor, cities, slums, and land in that order. And a more important question is what I started asking this question to Billy about 4 months ago, which is the genesis of this particular meeting. And that was, why is slum upgrading not scaling up in this country? And not only that, what should be done? And even though there is not much time, I'm going to kind of take 5 or 7 minutes to answer this very, very briefly, because I think is very important to answer this question. First is, in this meeting, we have not touched upon poor at all. And I think it's very important to touch poor because we must be talking about cities as a way to reduce, alleviate urban poverty. And if that's the case, then it's very important we've got to define how do you define urban poverty reduction. And I just dug out my own file on this, and I think I just thought I'll mention this. What I wrote was this: that poverty reduction challenge essentially includes the challenge of reducing inequality and exploitation, relieving misery, and creating more humane conditions for working, living, and development for those disadvantaged people and marginalized groups who have made city their home already are in the process of doing so. This was the one part of the definition. Second part of the definition is, and this is also very important, the task of adequately feeding, educating, housing, and employing a large number of undernourished, illiterate, unskilled, unemployed, impoverished city dwellers, including women, children, and disabled, who are living on payments, poorly serviced chawls, unhygienic slums, and other forms of degraded settlements, and who are struggling to make a living from low-paying and often unstable occupation in a reasonably time span is essence of urban poverty reduction challenge and cities' role in doing that. So this is the first part. I also was talking about poverty alleviation strategies, which are the macro strategies, but in that, cities' role needs to be seen. What is that? Poverty alleviation happens only in two ways. One is the indirect route approach, which is trickle-down effect of rapid economic growth, which cities do with 70% of GDP being produced there. And it is also very clear that low and insufficient growth does not lead to trickle down, and higher growth touches poverty. But for greater impact, it needs following orientation. It requires employment creation, it requires better distribution, it requires spatial, sectorial, and spatial balance, and it requires poor focus. So this, once again, in the context of cities, land, slums, and housing. Under the direct route approach, which is the spatial target group focus strategy of A, investment, B, assets creation, 3, livelihood improvement, 4, infrastructure development, and 5th, basic services provision. So this direct route poverty programs are many, but largely focus on villages, but they require they are suffering from improper targeting, resource constraints, tardy implementation, leakages, and corruption. But when coming to urban-rural interrelationship, is very important and key through this urban poverty alleviation is an autonomous phenomenon. So what one is saying is this, that village and sustainable rural development strategy should be an integral part of fostering a new urban future. So what one is talking about is not only land in the context of cities, not land in the context of slums, land in the larger geography of places and the whole dynamics of economic growth that is taking place. That is the phenomenon of urban poverty reduction and role of cities. Having said that, I wanted to come back to on this that I said very quickly because there is not enough time, but I think there is a great deal to be explained. Coming to specifics, I also wanted to kind of mention 5, 6 strategies in 2 minutes because there's not much time. Number one is this, that in the context of cities, poverty, slums, and land, it is very important in the context of India to make a very assertive statement. And that statement is this, that cities without slum is possible, that it is doable. It needs many things, but it certainly needs political will, political resolve, and political decision making. If that happens, things would start happening, as it happened in the case of Manrega 15 years ago. No one believed that the country had so much resources to really kind of give it to the poor. We did this 15 years ago, and it's a very effective safety net for the poor. Similarly, on the other hand, we're talking about bullet train. And the moment a decision was made to kind of implement bullet train, partners happened, technology came in, resources became available, land became available too. So the question is not only planning, the question is political decision making, political will, political connection, impact on doing this. Third thing that I wanted to kind of say was this, that if this had to happen, if cities without slum were to happen, land is a very, very critical issue. And if land is a critical issue, land is not going to be provided to the poor by market. Only way it would happen will require state intervention in providing land to people. Market will not be able to do it. Market is never done in this kind of situation. And I think we've got to understand as early as possible. And as a matter of fact, when you look at India, and even though you don't want to believe this, fact remains, if you really look at the history of last 50 years, it's happened. We had Urban Land Selling Act in 1975. It didn't work. It didn't produce results. But fact remains, there was a political will. But when it came to implementation, they couldn't kind of take it through. More recently, when cities without slum was talked about for the earlier government, there were instrumentality talked about in terms of how to do it. And as it was pointed out, it's already happening in Orissa on a fairly substantial scale. So question is to really kind of internalize it. Question is to really kind of make it in the mainstream and see that it's possible. And therefore, talking about slums, talking about slum upgrading, land is something very, very important. Second thing that is required to be done, and if you're really talking about citywide slum upgrading strategy as a potential to solve the problem, then of course there are a large number of things I'll talk about tomorrow, starting not, land is only part of it. So you've got to kind of enable your municipal corporation, you've got to provide services, you've got to start looking at people's housing as solutions, not problem. You've got to kind of involve people in the whole processes, and you've got to create a whole environment within which people could look at. Next thing, which I think is very important, which is forgotten in the Indian context all the time, you cannot be talking about slums only in the housing context. You've got not to be talking about informality only in the context of settlement. You've got to be talking about informality also in the context of livelihood, income, and economy. And therefore, when you talk about land, a land supply, or such cities' role in kind of providing land, it is not only in the context of shelter, it is also in the context of economy. And therefore, when you've got to look at informal settlements and informal economy together, and if you do that, your housing would change, your planning would change, your transport will change, and of course, your cities will change, I think, eventually. My last 2 point is this, that when you talk about instruments, what I thought was the most effective instrument we have in terms of institutional innovation in this country something which produced results 30, 40 years ago is completely forgotten, is the urban community development services. Now, this was one department within the municipal corporation which looked at poor not in terms of water, not in terms of slums, not in terms of cleanliness. It looked upon people as people. They as the resource, they as problem solver, they as people who could interested in improving their own lives. And this instrumentality, this institutional innovation is something which needs to be kind of brought back in the context of we dealing with the whole issue of urban slums, urban land, urban poverty, and improving our cities. Having said that, as I said, something that I wanted to take 10, 15 minutes to say. I don't have time, so I'll just run through that. But let me kind of take 2 more minutes to thank you, Cities Alliance and GIZ, for this partnership in organizing this event. I'm grateful especially to Bill and Ana Claudia and Aparnaji for making time, for bringing everyone together and seeing that it goes on exceedingly well. I must also thank this remarkable panel who made time available, shared insights and experiences and their approaches to the whole thing. I also must thank my colleague and friend Banashri for introducing this webinar. And of course, I must thank my colleagues in studio in half, Radhika, Shimul, Alika, Dhwani, and Nita for the work they do behind the scene. As everyone has said, that there is a second chapter of this conversation tomorrow at the same time, and we are looking at some upgrading and what do we do with this? How do you make it possible? So thank you very much. It's taken long. I think we have run 30 minutes more, but it's very interesting, very, very remarkable, and very thoughtful. Thank you very much.